This is CrossCode. And CrossCode's level design is impeccable, sublime. The game's sense of adventure and sprawling levels make for a truly special experience. And when I play CrossCode, I feel like a kid again. That's not something I've ever said about a game before. So what about CrossCode makes it so special? CrossCode is a top-down action game with heavy influence from JRPGs, modern MMOs, and SNES-era gameplay mechanics. It borrows from classics like Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, and The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and employs real-time combat and an abundance of puzzles in a densely complex world with densely complex level designs. But CrossCode manages to set itself apart from those games by the way its levels are designed to incorporate platform height and patterns of elevation. Platforms become not just a way to get around, but the basis for countless puzzles and secrets, to the point that CrossCode blurs the line between what is a puzzle and what is platforming. This blend is integral in creating CrossCode's unique sense of wonder and curiosity that game developers across all genres chase, and CrossCode just nails it. This video won't contain any mega spoilers or anything, but it will reveal some treasure locations or gameplay mechanics that you may want to discover on your own. Also, I can't stress enough that I highly recommend that you pause this video right now and check out the demo or pick up the game on Steam. If you're like me, then you won't want this experience spoiled for you. If you've seen our analysis of Mighty Number 9, you might recall that that's a game where the mechanics and the controls are completely mismatched with the level design, making for some pretty clumsy experiences. CrossCode is the exact opposite. This is a game that nails down its mechanics, explains them intelligently and fully, and then uses its level design to constantly reinforce the best and most enjoyable parts of its gameplay. Here's how. The first thing you notice in CrossCode's starting area is that the level design leans heavily into the Z-axis, or is it the Y-axis? Depth. There's many layers of depth here. Elevation and platform height play a huge part in the exploration and adventure of CrossCode's world. And while it may resemble the layout of games like A Link to the Past, this level design constantly emphasizes the manipulation of elevation, to the point that it almost feels like a playground where you're constantly moving and jumping around, because that in itself is so enjoyable. Let's break it down by looking at how you jump in CrossCode. Put simply, jumping is done automatically when you're on off a ledge, and that's it. If you've played any of the 3D Zelda games, it's just like that. Automatic jumping skirts the issue of having to precisely time your jumps just before you fall off a ledge. So unless your game is like Super Meat Boy, where jump timing is actually part of the core gameplay, this automatic jumping is more often than not actually an improvement. And that's doubly true for CrossCode. You can of course use jumping to cross short gaps, and as long as you leave a ledge running at full speed, you'll always jump your maximum distance, which means you'll always know right away whether a gap can be crossed or if it's just a bit too wide. Since there's no dedicated jump button, this also means you can't jump around on a flat surface. So the only way to gain elevation is through step-up ledges. Sort of like those ledges that you can grab, again, in those 3D Zelda games. So right off the bat, you know that you don't have to waste your time jumping against every wall searching for a way up. You can just focus your attention on your current height while keeping an eye out for those very obvious step-up ledges. Quick sidebar. Early in the game, you can accept a quest to start filling out your plant's encyclopedia, or your botanical encyclopedia, whatever. Each area has its own unique plant life, and you can document them simply by destroying them, and they make the most satisfying sound effects. Oh yeah! Oh, here it comes, get ready. Get ready. Whoa! Since combat in CrossCode is done at predetermined locations, this is a great way to give the player something to hack and slash at while they're running around between fights. It also takes advantage of the player's ability to shoot spheres across the screen in any direction. Some plants are extremely rare, and only a careful eye will spot them and be able to actually hit them. But if you stand on just the right ledge at just the right angle and use a well-aimed sphere shot, you can take them right out. Now this is something you're going to be doing a lot of in CrossCode, because plants actually drop their own loot. Think of them as sort of miniature treasure boxes, whereas actual treasure boxes are fairly uncommon and generally hold a crafted food or drink or a piece of equipment. You can easily smash through 100 plants on your way through a zone, all the while collecting the base crafting materials they drop and filling out your encyclopedia on the way to your actual destination. The plant destruction mechanic is a great rapid-fire complement to the slow burn of opening treasure boxes and engaging in combat. Okay, so with jumping and plants out of the way, let's actually look at the level design. This is Autumn's Rise, the first overworld area of the game where you're pretty much free to do whatever you want. Autumn's Rise is dense with terrain features. There are many platforms at many different heights, gaps to cross, and valleys to jump down into and explore. And once you do start exploring Autumn's Rise, it's not long before you realize that these ubiquitous terrain features are not just for filling out the area or for funneling you around. They actually form additional unique level designs on top of the ground level. The implications for creative freedom here are consequently massive, because we're essentially exploring three-dimensional levels from a top-down perspective, and not just in a gimmicky way like that silly 3D maze from Mario RPG. Ugh. Of course, CrossCode is not the first game to use heights as puzzles or barriers to exploration, but it's all in the execution, right? And CrossCode might be my very favorite in that regard. So why does that blow my mind? For one thing, it's a beautiful solution to the fundamental question, how do you make interesting level design in a top-down game? Imagine that we start with a flat empty room and we don't have the luxury of adding elevation. There are only so many ways that we can lead the player around the area while keeping them inside of it. If you just want to funnel the player from point A to point B, you have to add some sort of obstacles, objects or terrain whose sole purpose is to be in your way so that you're forced to path around them. Maybe it's a barricade, although a reasonable person would just climb right through. Or it's a shoulder-high fence, although a reasonable person could just hop it. Or a group of unpathable trees, although any normal person could just walk right through them. That's a clumsy solution, and it can be transparent that the developers have placed these obstacles in exactly the right places to funnel you through the way they intend. And instead of using those unpathable piles of debris or fences or invisible walls, it's the terrain and platforms themselves that restrict you to certain paths around a room. But because this presentation is so much more logical and fits perfectly into the game's universe, you hardly even notice it. Of course, these obstacles aren't merely to funnel you around in CrossCode, but are actually placed intelligently so that you can use them to reach higher elevations. If we go 1 or 2 levels higher than the ground floor, we'll see that the gaps between these platforms are often wider, and because these elevated paths must also be traversable in their own right, every platform elevated above the ground level directly influences the level design of the ground level itself. They have to be close enough together to jump across, while not impeding on the design and flow of the ground level path. So the ground floor and all the levels above it are completely intertwined, and the features of one dictate the features of the other. If someone just described to you what CrossCode's levels look like, you might expect them to resemble some sort of spaghetti mess of cluttered platforming, and yet the developers managed to craft logically flowing layouts even under such heavy restrictions. From this bird's eye view, it's really easy to see the care and the thought that went into designing each level, but in execution, it's so subtle as to be unnoticeable. Another reason this blows my mind is for its economy of level design. Remember how in our cave story analysis, we discussed that cave story frequently makes you manually backtrack through areas, but because the platforms and enemies change depending on which way you're headed, it still feels like a fresh challenge. Well, the same thing applies here in CrossCode. By layering a second set of platforms on top of the first, we don't need to have 2 separate layouts that have only nominal or no connection at all. Anytime you do see a treasure box on any height above the ground level, you know you're going to be able to get up there somehow, so you're tempted to scour the ground level for a ledge that'll let you jump up to that second height. It does a great job at getting you to move all over the map, looking at every single nook and cranny for an intermediary ledge. By the way, this is a brilliant example of giving the player a short-term goal, then laying out all the tools they'll need to achieve it, and finally letting them just run wild. Here's the third, and probably the biggest reason, that CrossCode's level design blows my mind. It allows individual layouts to form one giant, cohesive, and continuous mega layout. And this is exactly how the developers have designed it. This comprehensive map of Autumn's Rise helps to illustrate that. Early on in the area, you are required to jump over a narrow river, but once you're over it, you might never think about it again. It might never occur to you that this river will realistically cross through other parts of the zone. Or you might face a wall that seems unpathable from one room, only to discover that it's the same platform in the room right next to you. So this platform has an actual reason to exist, other than simply to just litter and clutter the landscape and prevent you from pathing over it. If you have a sheer cliff with a treasure box resting on top, you can be certain that approaching that cliff from the opposite side will allow you to eventually ascend towards the peak and grab that treasure. Overall, the geography from room to room connects logically, and it makes sense because it has to, not only on the ground level, but every level above it, There have been some great puzzles in CrossCode I've experienced that wind around many different rooms, and even though they take you all over the map, they still feel cohesive. But with CrossCode, it's rarely just 2 levels of elevation. You'll easily see 3, 4, or even more heights at once above the ground floor, each with their own paths hidden in plain sight and built on top of seemingly innocuous terrain features of the levels below them. We mentioned at the start that CrossCode is a game that focuses on puzzles. And what makes this level design truly special is that it allows for puzzles to span more than a single room and a single height. There's basically no ceiling on the design space here. The path to a treasure can be as simple as jumping up to a single ledge, or as complex as spanning an entire area. Now, you're not able to go everywhere right at the start. Some of these paths are also gated by abilities that you get during the game's story. This means you'll be doing a lot of backtracking if you want to find the most well-hidden treasures, and each time you return to the zone, you'll make a little bit more progress. You never just breeze through a zone and never look back. You're always returning to where you've been and continuously making progress in collecting all the treasure that zone still hides. So we can scale the rewards of our platforming puzzles with the difficulty of those platforming sections themselves. For example, we could start in one room, find an elevated ledge, then use that to move to the next room to find a switch that lowers a gate in a third room, which will let you climb up to an even higher elevation to reach a treasure box in a fourth room. Even if you know exactly what to do, each layout is fairly large, so this is still more than just a cakewalk. You could conceivably, of course, encounter a puzzle that requires you to visit 5 or more separate rooms while pathing along 5 or more separate heights, and it doesn't take long here to see how esoteric these puzzles can become, and consequently, how rewarding it feels for the die-hard explorer to finally solve them. Luckily, you won't really feel like you're in over your head here, because CrossCode is a game that loves to give you stats. A quick check on your map tells you exactly how many treasure chests remain in each area. There's also an extensive stats menu that breaks down your total completion percent for treasures, enemy data, botanical information, and almost anything else you'd want to know about your progress. So when you do take the time to explore off the beaten path, you always have a rough idea of how much left there is to discover in each zone. When we combine all these elements together, they make exploration so rewarding because of the feeling of revelation you get when you finally connect their dots, all of which makes for some extremely satisfying but totally optional platforming. This is really the icing on the cake here. Almost all of this is optional. If you beeline through Autumn's Rise to the next area, you would miss all of this. Almost the entire zone is skippable, but because you have plenty of opportunities to diverge from the main path to explore on a whim, your curiosity is likely to lead you down one of these optional roads to see what awaits. As paths connect together, or a switch creates a new shortcut, or an uncertain leap leads to a very well-hidden reward, I find myself smiling in amazement and adoration at just how refreshing CrossCode's level design is. And we've only just covered the game's very first overworld area. These same principles extend to all the other areas, including the towns and the dungeons. But I think we're going to have to save those until next time, because they're absolutely worth covering in depth on their own. CrossCode is, at its heart, a game of exploration. And when we put all these puzzle pieces together, it really comes together in something truly special. It doesn't pull any punches for those who just want to speed through the game, but rather consistently and repeatedly rewards you for exploring. It's hard not to be inspired by the level design here, and I bet that when you play the game, the geometry and the terrain of this world sparks something in you, something primal, some curiosity that will have you scouring each room just for that one ledge, that one switch, that one opening, that lets you climb upward, survey the world before you, and then stand in amazement before heading out to chase the next treasure. 12 out of 10. Patreon, Discord, Twitter, etc., etc. And now some special thanks to our patrons: Alchemic, Brian Feral Pony Feeney, Brian Hinson, Cat Prog, Sea Bomber, Corey Stroick, or Stroik, I don't know which, Cyber Dryad, David Lopez, Delicious IB, Dr. Pepper, Hector Manuel Carrillo, John Hathaway, K-Branch, Moogle Girl, Richard Flores, Robert, Sam Myers, and Sebastian Becker. You keeping the dream alive, fellas? We love ya.